I'm Celeste, 27, female, and my own father publicly called me a disgrace and slapped me at my brother's wedding, completely unaware that my company was single-handedly running the entire event he was about to lose. The sting on my cheek was sharp, a sudden, bright shock in the warm, festive air of the reception hall. But it was nothing compared to the cold, hard certainty that settled in my heart in that moment. For years, I had walked a tightrope, trying to balance my love for what remained of my family with the ever-present need to protect myself from them. That slap, delivered in front of 500 guests, wasn't just an act of anger. It was a final, definitive push, and as I stumbled off that tightrope, I didn't fall. I flew. My family's story is a familiar one, a classic tale of a man who remarried too quickly and a child who became an inconvenient reminder of a life he'd left behind. My mother passed away from a sudden illness when I was 12. She was the sun in our family's solar system, warm, bright, and the center of everything. My father, Arthur, was a successful corporate lawyer, always more comfortable with legal briefs than with scraped knees or bedtime stories. My mom was the one who translated his stern silences into expressions of love, who filled our house with laughter and light. When she was gone, the light went out, and a chilling silence took its place. Less than 2 years later, Janice entered the picture. She was vibrant and attentive, showering my father with the kind of admiration he'd always craved. She was, in every way, the opposite of my mother. Where my mom was gentle, Janice was sharp. Where my mom was nurturing, Janice was needy. She saw me not as a grieving child to be comforted, but as a rival for my father's affection and resources. The battle for control of our family began subtly, a quiet campaign waged in passive-aggressive comments and feigned concern. One of the first clear memories I have of Janice's strategy was at my 16th birthday dinner. I had a mild allergy to shellfish, something my mother had always been careful about. For my birthday, I had requested my mom's signature lasagna, a comforting tradition. We went to a fancy Italian restaurant, and Janice, who had made all the arrangements, smiled sweetly at me. "I told the chef you wanted something special, darling," she said. What arrived was a seafood pasta, brimming with shrimp and mussels. I stared at it, my heart sinking. "Oh," Janice said, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I must have gotten confused. I thought you said you loved seafood." My father immediately shot me a warning look. "Celeste, Janice went to a lot of trouble. Be grateful." I couldn't eat the meal, of course, and spent the dinner picking at a bread roll while everyone else ate. Later, I overheard Janice telling my father in a tearful voice how she had tried so hard, and how I had rejected her efforts, making her feel like an outsider. He comforted her, and the next day, he told me I needed to apologize to Janice for being ungrateful and sulky. I was the one who had been ignored and put at risk, yet I was the one who had to make amends. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and it set the stage for the next decade of my life. Second major fracture happened when it was time for college. I had always been creative and organized, with a passion for bringing people together. I dreamed of starting my own business in hospitality and event management. My father, however, had a different plan. He was a lawyer, his father was a lawyer, and he decreed that I would go to law school. It wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. "The family has a legacy, Celeste," he'd said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will uphold it." When I received my acceptance letter to a top business school with a renowned hospitality program, he saw it as an act of defiance. "A party planner," he scoffed, throwing the acceptance letter onto his mahogany desk as if it were contaminated. "You want to waste your mind and my money on planning parties." "It's a business, Dad," I argued, my voice trembling slightly. "A real, profitable business, and I got a significant scholarship." "I don't care," he snapped. Janice was sitting on the sofa, observing the scene with a look of detached concern. "You will go to law school, or you will get no support from me. This is not a negotiation." I looked at him, at this man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, and I saw a stranger whose love was a web of conditions and expectations. I made my choice. I took the scholarship, I applied for student loans, and I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. I graduated with honors, but my father never once acknowledged my achievement. In his eyes, I had failed him by succeeding on my own terms. The final, decisive break, the financial cutoff mentioned in the title, came 3 years ago. I had just secured the seed funding to launch my own company, Aura Events. I was pouring every ounce of my energy and my own money into it. Around the same time, Janice decided she wanted to open a high-end boutique for designer dog clothes. It was a whim, a vanity project with no business plan and an astronomical budget. My father, indulging her as always, asked me to co-sign the business loan. "It's just a formality," he said, "to show the bank we're a family that supports each other." I knew better. Co-signing that loan would tie my fledgling, carefully managed business to her reckless venture. I refused. "Dad, I can't," I explained calmly. "My own business is just starting. I can't take on that kind of financial risk. It wouldn't be responsible." His face hardened. "Responsible? You talk to me about responsibility. Your responsibility is to your family. Janice is your family." "Janice's boutique is a bad investment," I said, my voice firm. "I love you, but I will not risk my entire future on it." The rage in his eyes was volcanic. He declared that my refusal was the ultimate act of betrayal. "You have made it clear that you are no longer a part of this family," he said, his voice chillingly formal. "Therefore, you will no longer benefit from it." The next day, a letter from his lawyer arrived, informing me that I had been officially removed as a beneficiary of the trust fund my mother had left for my brother Leo and me. My portion was to be absorbed into my father's general estate, which I knew meant it was now at Janice's disposal. It was a cruel, punitive act, meant to break me. But instead of breaking, I hardened. He had drawn his line in the sand, and I had no choice but to start building my own castle on the other side. For 3 years, my relationship with my father and Janice was one of cold, distant politeness. We saw each other at Christmas and on my brother Leo's birthday, occasions where we exchanged meaningless pleasantries and pretended the gaping chasm between us didn't exist. During this time, I poured my life into Aura Events. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a burning need to prove my father wrong, to prove that my path was not just valid but successful. And it was. We quickly gained a reputation for creating breathtaking, flawless events. We were bespoke, we were exclusive, and we were expensive. I stayed behind the scenes, the invisible architect of perfect moments. I was the owner, but to the public, my brilliant operations manager, Marco, was often the face of the company. It was a setup that suited my private nature, and as it would turn out, served a much greater purpose. My brother Leo was caught in the middle of it all. He was 2 years younger than me, the golden child by default because he was more compliant. He had dutifully gone to law school and now worked as a junior associate at our father's firm. He lacked my rebellious streak, his fear of our father's disapproval outweighing his own desires. He loved me, I knew that, but he navigated the family tension by avoiding it. He would call me privately, asking how I was, telling me he missed me, but he never once stood up to my father or Janice on my behalf. I understood, in a way. He was financially and professionally dependent on Arthur, and rocking the boat was a risk he wasn't willing to take. 4 months before his wedding to his lovely fiancée, Isabel, my phone rang. It was Leo, and I could hear the panic in his voice before he even said hello. "Celeste, I'm in trouble, big trouble." "Leo, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "It's the wedding," he groaned, his voice strained. "The wedding planner just quit. She said she'd rather forfeit her entire deposit than spend another minute on the phone with Janice." I couldn't help a small, wry smile. "Sounds about right. What did Janice do this time?" "What didn't she do?" he lamented. "She tried to change the venue 3 months out. She called the caterer to tell them the menu Isabel and I chose was tacky. She told the florist that Isabel's favorite flowers, peonies, were funereal. The planner, a woman named Mrs. Gable, finally just snapped. She sent a one-line email and blocked all our numbers." I sighed, a wave of pity for my brother washing over me. He and Isabel were sweet and unassuming. They deserved a beautiful day without all this drama. "I'm so sorry, Leo. That's awful. What are you going to do?" Finding a good planner on such short notice for a 500-person wedding is going to be almost impossible. There was a pause on the line, and I knew what was coming. "Well," he began, his voice hesitant, "that's why I'm calling you." I felt my stomach clench. "Leo, you know I can't. You know what it's like with me and Dad and Janice. It would be a nightmare." I know," he said, his desperation escalating. "But you're the best, Celeste. Everyone knows it. I saw that feature on Aura Events in Modern Luxury magazine. What you do is art. Isabel and I, we were hoping we could hire you. We'll pay, of course. We have some saving." "Yes." I closed my eyes. Leo's savings wouldn't cover the cost of the floral arrangements my company typically provided, let alone the entire event. But the plea in his voice was real. This was his wedding, the most important day of his life, and it was on the verge of collapsing because of the very toxicity I had escaped. To say no felt like abandoning him completely, but to say yes felt like walking willingly back into the fire. An idea began to form in my mind, a risky but elegant solution. "Leo," I said slowly, "Aura Events is completely booked, but a spot might have just opened up, but there would have to be some very, very strict conditions." "Anything, Celeste, I'll do anything," he promised. "First," I said, my voice all business now, "this will be my wedding gift to you and Isabel. Don't talk to me about your savings. I'll do it at cost for you. But that's our secret." He gasped. "Celeste, no, I couldn't ask." "You're not asking, I'm offering, but the conditions are non-negotiable. Condition 2, my point of contact is you and Isabel. Only you. I will not speak to Dad or Janice about the wedding, not once. All decisions made by you and Isabel are final. If they try to go through me, I walk. No questions asked." "Okay," he agreed immediately. "Okay, I can do that." Condition 3, and this is the most important one, I continued, the plan solidifying. "Dad and Janice can never know that I own the company. As far as they are concerned, they have hired a company named Aura Events. They will interact with my operations manager, Marco. They will see me on the day of the wedding, but I will be dressed as staff. They will assume I'm just an employee, a coordinator. They cannot know the truth, Leo. Do you understand?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him processing the implications. He was asking me to plan a party, but I was asking him to engage in a level of deception that was foreign to his nature. "Why, Celeste?" he finally asked, his voice soft. "Because," I answered truthfully, "it's the only way I can give you the wedding you deserve without losing my mind. It's the only way I can do my job. My work requires a professional environment, and with Dad and Janice, that's impossible. This is a boundary, Leo. It's for my protection. And yours." He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, his voice firming with resolve. "I understand, they'll never know, I promise." "Then send me the contract Mrs. Gable left behind," I said, already shifting into work mode. "My team and I have a wedding to save." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. I was walking back into the lion's den, but this time I wasn't just a visitor. I was the one building the cage. The next 3 months were a masterclass in covert operations and psychological warfare. True to my word, I handed all direct communication with the client's family over to Marco. He was perfect for the role. Impeccably professional, unflappable, and possessed of a polite but firm demeanor that could shut down unreasonable requests without causing an outright incident. He was my shield, and he earned every penny of his salary during that time. My first order of business was to have a detailed meeting with Leo and Isabel. I sat with them in a neutral coffee shop, far from our family's usual haunts, and we went over every detail. Isabel, bless her heart, was a dream to work with. Her vision was romantic and elegant, with a color palette of soft blush, cream, and gold. She was organized and decisive. Leo, for his part, was mostly just relieved. His only recurring request was, whatever makes Isabel happy and keeps Janice from breathing fire. We created a detailed plan, a binder thick with vendor contracts, timelines, and mood boards. Isabel and Leo signed off on every single page. This binder became our Bible, the sacred text that Marco would refer to in every interaction with Arthur and Janice. The calls started almost immediately. Janice, having gotten Marco's number from Leo, began her campaign. Her first call was about the new venue we had secured, a stunning old estate with rolling hills and a breathtaking glass conservatory for the reception. Mrs. Gable's original venue had been a modern hotel ballroom, which Janice had apparently decided was impersonal. "Marco, darling," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness in the recording Marco played for me later. "Janice here. Arthur and I were looking at the portfolio for this Aura events, and it's all very quaint. But this new venue, this old house in the country, it feels a bit rustic for a lawyer's wedding, don't you think? I have a friend on the board of the Symphony Hall. Much more prestigious." Marco's reply was smooth as silk. "Thank you for your input, Mrs. Father's last name." However, the venue was selected and confirmed by Leo and Isabel directly. They were quite enthusiastic about th. romantic character of the estate. All our contractual obligations are to them. This was a pattern that would repeat itself endlessly. Janice had opinions on everything. The string quartet for the ceremony was dour. The 5-tier cake design was excessive. The gold-rimmed chargers on the tables were gaudy. Each time, she would call Marco, and each time, he would politely but immovably refer back to the decisions made by the bride and groom. My father was less direct but more menacing. He tried to pull the "I'm paying for this" card, which was technically untrue. While he had given Leo a sum of money for the wedding, it was Leo who was writing the checks to Aura Events from his own account, which I was then secretly refunding. "Listen, Marco," Arthur said in one call, his voice low and intimidating. "I don't know how you people do business, but when I hire someone, I expect them to listen. My wife has some excellent suggestions, and you seem to be ignoring them. I suggest you start showing her the proper respect." "Mr. Father's last name," Marco responded, his tone perfectly even. "We have the utmost respect for everyone in the family. Our process, however, is designed to eliminate confusion and stress for the bride and groom. We take our direction exclusively from them, as per our signed agreement. It ensures a cohesive vision for their special day." The frustration on their end was palpable. They were used to being in control, and they had been rendered powerless by a contract they couldn't breach and a manager they couldn't intimidate. I had to admit, there was a small, satisfying part of me that enjoyed listening to the recordings of their failed attempts to steamroll my company. The most stressful moment came 2 weeks before the wedding. I was on site at the estate, overseeing the preliminary setup of the lighting rigs in the conservatory. My phone buzzed. It was Leo, and he sounded distraught. "She found out," he whispered. My blood ran cold. "Found out what?" "About you," he said. "Not that you own the company, but that you work for it." Janice was complaining to Isabel about Marco being uncooperative, and Isabel, trying to be helpful, said something like, "Oh, but Celeste is on the team too. I'm sure she'll make sure everything is perfect." She thought she was smoothing things over. I squeezed my eyes shut, leaning against a cool glass panel. "What happened?" Janice went ballistic. She called Dad, and now he's furious. He's on a rampage, saying he refuses to have his disobedient daughter serving canapés at his son's wedding. He says it's humiliating. He's threatening to call the whole thing off. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The whole carefully constructed plan was about to implode. "Put him on the phone, Leo," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. A moment later, my father's enraged voice boomed through the speaker. "Celeste, what is the meaning of this? You're working for this company. After I forbade you from this ridiculous career, you're doing this just to spite me, to embarrass me." "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "I'm not doing this to spite you. I'm doing this for Leo. Your planner quit, and he was in an impossible situation. I am here as a professional doing my job." "A professional? You're a wedding coordinator. I will not have you there in a uniform like a servant. It reflects poorly on the family." The word servant hung in the air, thick with his disdain. It was the ultimate insult from a man obsessed with status. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just angry, he was deeply, profoundly ashamed of me. "That is my job, Dad," I said, a new iciness in my tone. "The same job that is creating the wedding you'll be taking credit for in 2 weeks. If my presence is so offensive to you, then you have a choice. You can either accept that I will be there, doing my job quietly and professionally, or you can explain to 500 guests why the wedding is cancelled. Leo and Isabel have signed a contract. Aura Events will fulfill it. Your attendance, however, is optional." I had never spoken to him like that before. The silence on his end was so complete I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he just said, "This is not over," and the line went dead. Leo came back on, sounding shaken. "What do we do?" "We do nothing," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "The bluff has been called. He won't cancel. His public image is more important to him than his anger at me. He'll be there, and he'll be furious, but he'll be there. Just keep him away from me on the day, Leo, please." "I will," he promised. As I hung up, I looked at the beautiful, empty conservatory, the fairy lights twinkling above me. The joy and excitement I'd felt planning my brother's wedding had vanished, replaced by a grim sense of duty. I wasn't just building a wedding anymore. I was building a fortress. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky so clear. In blue it seemed painted on. At the estate, a quiet, focused energy buzzed in the air. This was my element. The controlled chaos of a large-scale event, the symphony of vendors and staff all moving in harmony under my direction. It was the world I had built for myself. A world where I was competent, respected, and in complete control. I was dressed in the standard Aura Events uniform, a sleek, black pantsuit with a small, discreet Aura logo embroidered on the lapel. With my hair pulled back in a tight bun and a communications earpiece nestled in my ear, I was virtually anonymous. I was no longer Celeste, the daughter or the sister. I was the manager, a ghost in the machine of perfection. Marco was my frontline general, handling the arriving guests and any family interactions, while I stayed in the background, conducting the orchestra. From my vantage point on a small balcony overlooking the ceremony lawn, I watched the guests arrive. They were a sea of expensive suits and pastel dresses, a veritable who's who of my father's legal and social circles. They marveled at the stunning floral arches, the perfectly spaced chairs, the gentle music of the string quartet wafting through the air. They had no idea that the disgraceful daughter of the man of the hour had personally overseen every single detail. Then I saw my family arrive. My father, Arthur, looked regal and proud in his tailored tuxedo. He greeted his guests with a booming laugh, the perfect picture of the magnanimous host. Janice was clinging to his arm, resplendent in a glittering, champagne-colored gown that was perhaps a shade too close to white for a stepmother of the groom. She surveyed the scene with a proprietary air, as if she had personally hung every crystal from the weeping willow trees. Finally, I saw Leo. He was standing near the altar, looking handsome but incredibly nervous, fidgeting with his bow tie. I gave a quiet command into my earpiece. "Marco, go to the groom," a little reassurance. A moment later, I saw Marco appear at Leo's side, murmur something with a calming smile, and adjust his bow tie. Leo took a deep breath and nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over his face. My heart ached with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. I was so close, a silent guardian of my brother's happiness, yet so utterly removed from it. I was watching my own family's milestone event through a window, an invisible wall of my own making separating me from them. When Isabel appeared at the end of the aisle, a collective gasp went through the crowd. She was breathtaking. As she walked toward Leo, her eyes locked on his, and the nervous tension melted from his face, replaced by pure, unadulterated joy. In that moment, all the stress, all the drama, felt worth it. I had protected this for them. The ceremony was beautiful. Afterwards, as the guests moved toward the conservatory for the reception, I did a final sweep. Everything was in place. The tables were set with military precision, the lighting cast a warm, golden glow, the champagne fountain we'd fought Janice on was bubbling merrily, and the nine-piece band was warming up on the stage. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. It was perfect. It was an Aura Events masterpiece. For a few hours, the event ran like a dream. The dinner service was flawless. The speeches were heartfelt, though my father's speech notably failed to mention my late mother, a familiar sting, and the dance floor was packed. I stayed on the periphery, a shadow with a clipboard, directing my staff with quiet hand signals and whispered commands into my mic. I saw my father laughing with a judge, and Janice holding court with a group of other socialites, undoubtedly taking credit for the fabulous planners they had found. I allowed myself a small, private moment of satisfaction. I had done it. I had pulled it off. I had navigated the treacherous waters of my family and delivered a day of pure magic for my brother. As Leo and Isabel took to the floor for their first dance, a slow, romantic ballad, I felt a lump form in my throat. I watched them, lost in their own world, and for the first time that day, I felt a pang of deep, personal longing. A longing for a family that could celebrate together without caveats and conditions. A longing for a father who could look at me and see something other than a disappointment. The dance ended, the crowd applauded, and the band kicked into a more upbeat number. The party was in full swing. I checked my watch. Everything was on schedule. The cake cutting was in 30 minutes, followed by the dessert bar unveiling. The storm had been weathered. The rest of the evening should be smooth sailing. Or so I thought. The catalyst for the explosion was, as it so often was, Janice, and it started with a song. There was a song by Frank Sinatra, Summer Wind, that my mother and father had considered their song. After my mother died, I couldn't listen to it without feeling a profound sadness. For my father, it seemed to have the opposite effect. It was as if listening to it erased my mother's memory and replaced it with a generic, pleasant nostalgia that he could handle. Janice, knowing my feelings about the song, had made it her mission to adopt it as her and Arthur's own. She requested it at every opportunity, a small, cruel assertion of her place in our family's history. During the planning, Isabel, who knew the song's significance to me, had specifically put it on the do not play list. She had been gentle but firm. "It's a beautiful song, Janice," she'd said during one tense planning meeting, "but Leo and I have chosen other songs that feel more like us." Now, in the middle of the packed dance floor, Janice decided to overrule the bride. She sashayed over to the band leader, a seasoned professional named David, whom I had worked with for years. "I have a special request from the father of the groom," she announced, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "He would love for you to play Summer Wind." David smiled politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but that song is on the do not play list provided by the bride and groom." Janice's smile tightened. "Oh, that must be a mistake. I'm the groom's mother. I assure you it's fine." "My instructions are very clear," David said, his professionalism unwavering. "I can only make changes to the setlist if they come directly from Leo or Isabel." Janice's face flushed with anger. To be publicly denied by the hired help was an indignity she could not bear. She spun on her heel and marched directly toward my father, who was holding court by the bar. I saw her speak into his ear, her expression one of theatrical distress. I saw his posture change, his back stiffening, his jovial host persona evaporating. He put his drink down with a sharp click and began striding purposefully in my direction. I was standing near a service entrance, quietly instructing a waiter to begin preparing the coffee service. I was completely focused on the logistics of the next phase of the evening. I didn't even see him coming until he was right in front of me, his large frame blocking the light. "You," he snarled. His voice was low, but it cut through the din of the party like a knife. "I want a word with you." Before I could even process what was happening, he had gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my skin, and was pulling me toward a small alcove hidden behind a curtain. "What is your problem?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Your job is to facilitate, not to obstruct. Janice made a simple, sentimental request, and you have your little minions embarrassing her in front of our guests." "Dad, I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, trying to pull my arm free. The band leader is following the playlist agreed upon with Leo and Isabel. Don't lie to me, he spat, his face contorting with rage. He was no longer seeing a wedding planner, he was seeing his defiant daughter. All the pent-up fury from the past few months, from the past few years, was bubbling to the surface. This is just like you. Arrogant, disrespectful, always thinking you know best. You waltz in here with your clipboard and your little uniform, pretending you're some big shot, but you're just a glorified servant, and you're ruining my son's wedding. His words struck me, each one a calculated blow. The word servant again. The raw contempt in his voice was staggering. At that moment, Leo and Isabel, having seen the commotion, rushed over. Dad, what's going on? Stop it. Leo pleaded, trying to get between us. My father barely glanced at him. His eyes, burning with a furious light, were locked on me. He saw my expression, which I'm sure was not one of fear, but of cold, dawning realization. I wasn't just an employee he was angry with. I was the source of his shame, the living symbol of his perceived failures as a patriarch. You have been nothing but a thorn in my side since your mother died, he seethed, his voice rising, drawing the attention of guests nearby. The music seemed to fade into the background as a pocket of silence began to form around us. You are selfish, you are ungrateful, and you are a disgrace to this family. And then, in front of my brother, his new wife, and a growing audience of stunned onlookers, he raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The crack of the impact was sharp and final. My head snapped to the side, and a burning, electric shock radiated across my cheek. The entire world seemed to lurch to a halt. The music stopped. The chatter died. The silence was absolute, broken only by Isabel's horrified gasp. In that silence, something inside me shifted. The years of trying, of hoping, of enduring it all crumbled to dust. The tightrope I had been walking for so long simply vanished, and my feet touched solid ground. There was no pain, no tears. There was only a profound and terrifying clarity. He had Inalai shown me exactly who he was, and in doing so, he had set me free. I slowly turned my head back to face him. I looked at his face, flushed with rage. I looked at Janice, standing behind him, a flicker of cruel triumph in her eyes. I looked at my brother, his face a mask of pure horror and helplessness. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My actions would speak for me. Calmly, I lifted my left hand to my earpiece, my fingers steady. I pressed the small button. Marco, I said, and my voice was as clear and even as a bell. Execute contingency plan Exodus. Shut it all down, pack it all up. We're out in 15. There was no hesitation on the other end. Just a crisp, professional reply. Copy, Celeste. The change was immediate and shockingly efficient. One moment, the conservatory was a scene of magical festivity. The next, it was a workplace undergoing a rapid, orderly shutdown. The first thing to go was the atmosphere. The warm, golden, romantic lighting that had taken hours to program vanished, replaced by the stark, flat, unsparing glare of full white utility lights. The effect was brutal, stripping away all the magic and exposing the room for what it was: a glass box full of stunned people in formal wear. Simultaneously, the nine-piece band, who had been mid-song, stopped playing. The sudden, total silence was more jarring than a fire alarm. The band members, all seasoned professionals who had worked with Aura events before, immediately began packing their instruments with quiet, practiced movements. They knew the drill. Contingency Plan Exodus was a clause in all our vendor contracts for extreme client misconduct or unsafe working conditions. It had only ever been a theoretical possibility, a safety net I had insisted on, until tonight. My father stood frozen, his hand still slightly raised, the look of fury on his face slowly morphing into one of utter confusion. What is the meaning of this? He sputtered, looking around at the unfolding scene. Turn the music back on. No one listened. My staff, a team of nearly 40 people, waiters, busboys, technicians, and coordinators, moved like a single, well-oiled machine. They emerged from the kitchens and service corridors, their expressions neutral and professional. They began to systematically dismantle the event around the shell-shocked guests. The lavish floral centerpieces, heavy with roses and peonies, were lifted from the tables. The gold-rimmed chargers were stacked onto rolling carts. The champagne fountain was turned off, its cheerful bubbling silenced, and was carefully drained by two technicians. At the far end of the room, the doors to the dessert bar, which had been set to open for a dramatic reveal in just a few minutes, were locked. The multi-tiered wedding cake, a masterpiece of sugar and artistry, was carefully wheeled back into the catering bay. The food that was still on the buffet warmers was cleared. The bars were closed, and bartenders began packing away bottles and glassware. Guests stood in stunned groups, murmuring in disbelief. They looked from my father to me and back to the staff who were methodically erasing the party from existence. It was not chaotic. It was the opposite, a chillingly calm, orderly, and complete evacuation of services. Janice was the first to find her voice, a shrill shriek that cut through the quiet efficiency. "Stop this, you can't do this, we paid for a wedding." She grabbed the arm of a young waiter who was removing a tablecloth. He simply looked at her, then at me. I gave a slight nod, and he gently extricated his arm and continued his work. My father, finally jolted out of his stupor, turned his rage on the nearest person in an aura uniform, who happened to be Marco. Marco had made his way to the center of the room, tablet in hand, overseeing the operation. "You," Arthur bellowed, jabbing a finger in Marco's chest. "Who gave this order? I'll have your job. I'll sue your pathetic little company into oblivion. Who is your boss? I want to speak to the owner of this sham operation right now." Marco didn't flinch. He looked my father directly in the eye, his expression calm, almost pitying. "Sir, the order was given because our staff was subjected to a hostile and physically aggressive environment, which is a direct violation of the terms of service outlined in our contract." "Contract?" my father scoffed. "My son signed that contract, I'm paying the bills." "With all due respect, sir," Marco said, his voice level, "the financial arrangement for this event was unique. The service was provided as a personal gift to Leo and Isabel from the owner of Aura Events. That gift, and all associated services, has just been formally and irrevocably rescinded." My father's face went from red to a pale, mottled white. The words personal gift and owner seemed to short-circuit his brain. He stared at Marco, speechless. Janice looked equally bewildered. "A gift? What are you talking, Abbo?" Who would gift a wedding this expensive?" Marco held my father's gaze for a long moment. Then, he slowly turned and gestured across the room, toward the main exit where I was now standing, my car keys in my hand. My team had cleared a path for me, a silent honor guard. The sting on my cheek had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache, a physical reminder of the line that had been crossed. I met my father's eyes across the brightly lit, half-empty room. For the first time, he was seeing me. Not as his daughter, not as a servant, but as the architect of the entire, perfect evening he had just destroyed. "You'll have to take that up with her," Marco said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "Ms. Celeste, the founder and owner of Aura Events." The full weight of the situation finally crashed down on my father. The realization dawned not like a sunrise, but like a building collapsing. His jaw went slack. The successful company, the flawless execution, the stuck-up management he had railed against, the personal gift, the final, devastating shutdown, it was all me. He had not just slapped a disobedient daughter. He had slapped the woman who held his son's entire wedding in the palm of her hand, and in his blind rage, he had forced her to close it. I didn't wait to see more. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his apologies if any were even to come. I turned my back on the wreckage, the half-dismantled party, the stunned guests, the ruins of my family, and I walked out the door. The cool night air felt clean on my face. Behind me, I could hear my father finally shout my name, a sound of pure, unadulterated desperation. I didn't stop. I just kept walking. The drive away from the estate was surreal. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, and my mind was strangely, unnervingly quiet. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness where a family used to be. My phone, which I had tossed onto the passenger seat, began to light up, a frantic, pulsing beacon in the darkness. First Leo. Then my father. Then Leo again. I pressed the Do Not Disturb button and let the screen go black. I drove to Marco's house. He lived just a few towns over, and I knew he would be coordinating the final stages of the pack-up from there. When I arrived, he opened the door before I could even knock, his face a mixture of concern and fierce loyalty. "The teams are clear," he said immediately. "All our people, all our equipment, the venue is secure. Are you okay?" I touched my cheek, which was now tender and starting to swell. "I will be," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "Thank you, Marco, for everything." "He had no idea," Marco said, shaking his head in disbelief. "All those weeks, all those phone calls. He never once suspected. He truly thought you were just a coordinator." "He only sees what he wants to see," I replied, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. "And he never wanted to see me." The next few days were a blur of silence on my end and escalating panic on theirs. I kept my phone off. Leo, in his desperation, began emailing me. The first few emails were frantic apologies, begging me to call him, telling me that Dad was going out of his mind. He wrote about the humiliation of trying to explain to 500 guests, including Isabel's horrified parents, why the wedding had abruptly ended before the cake was even cut. Then the tone of his emails shifted. Arthur had clearly gotten to him. The apologies were replaced with accusations. How could I have done that to him and Isabel on their wedding day? How could I be so cruel and vindictive? I had embarrassed the entire family. He wrote that Dad was prepared to make things right, but that I needed to be the bigger person and come talk to them. The idea that I, the one who had been publicly humiliated and assaulted, was expected to be the bigger person was the final confirmation I needed. They still didn't get it. They never would. They saw my reaction as the offense, not the action that had caused it. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for the consequences they were now facing. After a week of silence, I finally wrote back a single email, addressed to Leo but meant for all of them. "Leo," I wrote, "the slap was the end of a conversation I have been trying to have with Dad for 15 years. I will no longer be participating. My gift to you and Isabel was a beautiful wedding. I am sorry you were not able to enjoy all of it. The responsibility for that lies with the person who chose to strike a member of the event staff in the middle of the reception. It is not my job to manage Dad's anger or his consequences. It is not my job to be the bigger person in the face of his abuse. My only job now is to heal and to move on. I wish you and Isabel a happy marriage. But my relationship with you will have to be separate from my relationship with Dad and Janice, because my relationship with them is F. Or my own health and safety, over. Please respect my decision." I blocked their numbers, I set up a filter on my email, I cut the cord. It's been 6 months now. The fallout was immense. The story, of course, got out. The high society wedding that imploded became the stuff of local legend. My father's reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was left in tatters. He had publicly assaulted his own daughter and in doing so revealed himself to be a bully. Many of his clients were mortified. His law firm lost several major accounts. Janice, I heard through the grapevine, became something of a social pariah. Aura Events, on the other hand, thrived. The story, told in whispers and gossip columns, painted us as a company with unimpeachable professionalism and a zero-tolerance policy for abuse. We were inundated with requests from clients who wanted the team that walked out on principle. My dramatic exit had become the best, albeit most painful, marketing campaign I could have ever imagined. I see Leo and Isabel occasionally for quiet dinners in neutral locations. Our relationship is strained, wounded, but it's there. He has slowly started to understand that my actions were not about punishing him, but about protecting myself. He's started to see the toxic environment he grew up in more clearly, and he and Isabel are in therapy. I have hope for him. I have not seen or spoken to my father or Janice since that night. I am no longer the girl fighting for a scrap of her father's approval. I am a woman who built her own world, a world where respect is the baseline and where my worth is not up for debate. The slap was a brutal, painful gift. It was the moment my father, in trying to put me in my place, finally showed me that my place was far, far away from him. It was the moment he severed the last frayed thread that bound me to a past of pain and compromise. And as I stand here now, in the light of my own making, I know that I am not a disgrace. I am free. So Reddit, I lay this all out for you. Was I wrong to protect my peace so fiercely, even if it meant blowing up my brother's wedding? Or was this the only possible response to a lifetime of being told I was not enough?